Out of the car and onto the ground, the black BMW had just smashed through a crowd at speed at a Christmas market. The policeman screams, "Stay down, don't move." The driver puts his hands behind his back and his face on the road. The officer keeps his distance until backup arrives. A tradition from the Middle Ages to add light in the dark months. The fairy tale experience of the Magdeburg Christmas market ended just after 7 p.m. when the car suddenly rammed into a pedestrianised alleyway through queues waiting at stalls for mulled wine and gifts. Across a 400-metre-long path of destruction, 205 people were injured, 40 of them so seriously officials fear the death toll will rise in the days to come. So far, it stands at 5, among them a 9-year-old.
We're shaking. We're full of sympathy for the families. We also hope that nothing has happened to our relatives and our friends.
Just yesterday, the country marked 8 years since an Islamic extremist crashed a lorry into a Christmas market in Berlin, killing 12 people. One of its legacies, the use of concrete event barriers to help prevent such attacks. In Magdeburg last night, they were painted red and green for the occasion. The suspect found a gap intended to allow access for ambulances.
All of a sudden we heard a muffled noise, an engine roaring, people were screaming. It all happened in a fraction of a second. My friend said, "Get out of the way, it's coming towards us."
Tobias Rausch isn't just an eyewitness. He's a local politician from the far-right anti-immigration party Alternative for Germany, known as AfD.
I hope that this will be assessed from a political point of view, that there will be no bans on speaking and thinking any kind of opinion, but that we then take a sober approach and that we simply do what politics is supposed to do, namely create security for the population.
Germany is in the throes of a dramatic election campaign, triggered by the collapse of the government of Olaf Scholz and fuelled by bitter divisions over migration policies. As questions swirled over the suspect's motive, the Chancellor arrived with condolences and calls for unity. This political climate puts increased pressure on a swift investigation. The suspect, who police have not named, is reportedly a 50-year-old Saudi psychiatrist who's been living in Germany for almost 2 decades. Local press report he was granted asylum in 2016 and became an anti-Islam activist who's defended Saudi women refugees and criticised German authorities for what he calls the Islamisation of Europe.
At this point, we can only say for sure that the perpetrator was evidently Islamophobic. We can confirm that. Everything else is a matter for further investigation, and we have to wait.
The Magdeburg market is closed. Not, stress the authorities, because they're giving in to terror, but out of respect for the victims, hundreds of whom now face Christmas in hospital instead of at home.
Danny Eisdale reporting for us there. Well, I'm joined by Hans Jacob Schindler, who is the Senior Director of the Counter-Extremism Project, joining us from Berlin. Thank you very much, sir, for coming on the programme. The suspect, Taleb A, he has a very unusual profile from what we are hearing. Have you ever come across somebody like this before who has perpetrated an act of such serious harm, allegedly?
We did have cases where conspiracy theorists, and this is the category which he most fits into, had tried to perpetrate violent acts in Germany. There were attempts to abduct a federal minister last year. But this is a very odd and very specific combination of ideological narratives here. Anti-Islamic, hatred for Germany that protects him, hatred for the Saudis. It's just a really odd combination. And maybe the good news is it's so odd that it's not necessarily indicative of a new, bigger strand or network that would then present a threat of further violence. But it's a very unique set of conspiratorial narrative that this individual was led to violence. But it's clear any extremist narrative, the end leads to violence.
And one of the things that has been reported is that he was upset about the German government's treatment of Saudi refugees.
Yes, I read that too. Look, at the end of the day, it's really hard to understand any deeply disturbed individual, and any terrorist or mass murderer is, at the essence of its core personality, a very disturbed individual.
So he could have been a lone actor. This could be a case of a deeply disturbed individual that wasn't necessarily radicalized in the conventional sense.
This would be the good case scenario. I mean, we're at the very, very beginning of the investigation. The authorities are now taking a fine tooth comb, but in 2023, they had made a risk assessment for him specifically, and came to the conclusion that at that time, he was already an individual that showed very disturbing tendencies online, as, by the way, millions of others in the social media sphere of these days. But he was essentially not very likely at that time to use violence.
Understood.
That very obviously had changed.
As we heard from Danny's report, there is a febrile political situation in Germany at the moment. Is it possible to tell who this is likely to benefit? And if you could answer briefly.
Yeah, it's very clear that the right-wing extremist scene is using this already. So first it was anti-Islam, and then it became clear that he was himself anti-Islam, and now it's again the migration issue. Obviously, they're trying to take advantage of this,
of course.
And hence all of the democratic parties say this hatred was the cause of the attack. More hatred cannot be the solution to this.
Indeed. Hans Jacob Schindler, thank you very much indeed for your insights. We appreciate it.